So Jesus speaks about a way of life. In our second reading from 1 Peter, we learn why that's important. So listen again for the Spirit speaking. Rid yourselves therefore of all malice and all guile, insincerity, envy, and all slander. Like newborn infants, long for the pure spiritual milk, so that by it you may grow into salvation, if indeed you have tasted that the Lord is good. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own people, in order that you may proclaim the mighty acts of the one who called you out of darkness into marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. A word of God that is still speaking. Thanks be to God. So we are now in the third week of our Faith and Politics series, so I thought it's high time we talk about immigration. 1 Peter was written to Christians in Asia Minor, which is an area of modern-day Turkey. And Asia Minor at that time was very sparsely populated. It was mostly rural, and one of Rome's goals was to urbanize that region. So they resettled a significant number of people into the area from urban centers around the empire, and many of those were Christians from urban areas. It was a very rough transition for those immigrants. They did not know the customs of this new place they found themselves in. They didn't know the local traditions or the local dialect. And as any of you who grew up in rural areas know, you will always be an outsider. I don't care how long you live there. If you are an immigrant from another country or even another part of the United States, you will always be an outsider and you will always be looked at with suspicion. They were the outsiders. They were imposed on that native population by the Roman government, and they were also outsiders by virtue of their faith. When those early Christians first converted to Christianity, it was probably, when they first did it, just a monumentous experience in their life changing. But in their day-to-day life, many of them were rejected by their families. They were turned into authorities by their neighbors and sometimes their own families for practicing a forbidden religion. And they were viewed as followers of a strange religion that advocated eating human flesh and drinking human blood. Did you know that when Rome burned, Nero tried to blame the Jews for it? Nobody believed the Jews would do such a thing. So he switched and he blamed the Christians. Persecution at that point really rose against Christians, especially in Asia Minor. So these new immigrants to this new place that probably many of them didn't choose to go to, they needed a safe haven. They needed a place where they knew they were okay. And that safe haven was the church. The church provided them a place of safety, a place of belonging, a place of support, and just as importantly, a people to remind them of who they were. Not much has changed in 2,000 years, has it? We still need a place of safety. We still need a place to belong. We still need support. And now more than ever, we need a people to remind us of who we are. Because we forget. We get caught up in the divisions around us. We take sides. We build walls to keep out the crazies from the other side. Ever get indignant at something you hear in the news about something the other side has done, which of course just highlights the rightness of your own position and the depravity of theirs? Let's be honest, it's hard not to get caught up in that kind of thinking. It's hard not to get caught up in the politics of our chosen side. It's hard to not think that surely God is on our side. And it's hard not to assimilate into a society that seems to value vengeance over truth and death over compassion. And we should not assimilate into that kind of a society. We should not assimilate ourselves into a society that places all its hope in people and things that will ultimately let them down. A lot of us long for a community where we can experience something different. Yes, we long for a world that is different, but we know that that's a far ask at the moment. So at least we long for a community where we can experience something different, where we aren't required to hate anyone, where we aren't required to draw lines between us and them, a place where there's a little bit more love and compassion. But I suspect as much as we long for that, many of us recognize we have gotten sucked into that us versus them mentality. I know I've had my moments, and I know many of you have too, because I have heard it. We are all in good company. The letter of 1 Peter was first and foremost a reminder to these immigrants of how easy it is to forget who you are when you're surrounded by a culture so different from yours. It is too easy to become whatever is happening around you. So 1 Peter talks about three things: being a chosen race, a royal priesthood, and a holy nation. Being a chosen race goes back to God's call to Abraham and Sarah to leave the place, their home, to a place they had never seen before, to be God's chosen people. They were sent with a task, not for their own sake, but for the sake of the world. They were sent to be a conduit of God's blessings to all the families of the earth. A royal priesthood. What was the role of a priest? The role of a priest is to mediate God's blessings to others. It is to be an agent to reconcile people to God. We are a royal priesthood. We are called to mediate those blessings and be that agent of reconciliation. And we are a holy nation. A holy nation means we are set apart. We are to be a beacon of light to those who are looking for hope that will last. It's a different way of thinking about what it means to follow Jesus than even what we typically talk about today. And it really does start with remembering who you are. In our first reading, we heard Jesus say, "You have heard it said, but I say." You have heard it said was the way of the world, an eye for an eye. I'll hurt you before you have a chance to hurt me. Pushing the limits of what we can get away with before the negative consequences are more than we want to pay. Jesus always followed that up with, "But I say." And then he takes something that's really hard to argue with, something basic such as, "You shall not murder," and he dials it way back. Because if murder is the thing that's going too far, if that's what we're saying, then we're basically saying everything that leads up to that is okay. Just that next step of actually taking a life is where it becomes too much. Well, Jesus was saying it should never get that far in the first place. If you make fun of someone, if you call someone a fool, if you insult them, if you're angry with them, you have already gone too far. We are called to a way of life where we aren't testing the limits of how far we can go. Instead, actually, rephrase that. We aren't testing the limits of how far we can go down a road that's not good, but we are called to test the limits on how far we can go in terms of being kind to each other and loving each other and supporting each other and encouraging each other. Imagine what our world would be like if we were constantly trying to outdo one another in generosity and love and service. Imagine if politicians tried to outdo one another in kindness and compassion and caring. For the most part, I don't think our world thinks that way of life is sustainable, because we don't really we try and we give up. Had a Republican congressman in one of my congregations in Illinois, and I knew him from before he was elected, and he was the idealist. It's like, our system is so broken, I'm going to go in and I am not going to fall prey to the way things are. And even with the best of intentions, he realized he couldn't get anything done unless he fell prey to the way things are. So I'm not sure we really believe that the way of life we long for is sustainable. But we know what happens if we go with the flow, if we go with the crowd. And that's not sustainable either. We need to find another way. And we get encouragement on that when we find those little pockets where things are different. We know when we find ourselves in a community that practices kindness and compassion, that lifts others up, that seeks common ground rather than division. We know the impact that has on us. I know when I'm in a community like that because I feel like I could breathe. And we need to breathe. We need to feel safe enough to stop and take a breath so that our reactive brains can take a breath and our thinking brains can engage and we can remember who we are. That may be the best gift we give anyone right now, is a safe place to stop and breathe. We do that by living out the way of Jesus, which is summed up in the Sermon on the Mount, chapters 5 through 7. Also, right here on the banner behind me, do unto others as you would like them to do unto you. Be kind to others. Lift them up. Encourage them in ways that are life-giving. Listen to them. When we do that, oftentimes people who didn't even know that they were stressed to the max all of a sudden discover they can breathe. They didn't know they couldn't breathe before. And when we breathe, we make better choices. Peter said we are a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own people, so that we might declare the mighty acts of the one who calls us from darkness into light. As things around us slide further and further into chaos, we can shine a light into that and say, it doesn't have to be that way. Come and see. The world needs someone to stand up and say, put your hope in Jesus Christ, not in your chosen candidate for president. They will ultimately let you down because they are human just like you. The world needs someone to show it how to live with humility and kindness and justice, how to love when there is so much hate. That someone is us. That is what we are called to do. And when we treat each other with compassion and kindness and respect, we do show the world that there is another way to be in this world. When we rein in that impulse to lash out and instead pause and breathe, we show the world that we can make better choices. Now, I think we all know that those efforts are not always well received. We get called snowflakes. We get called weak. We get called unpatriotic in today's world. I had that happen to me. 6 weeks after I started a new call in a church, 9/11 happened. What a way to start your ministry in a church. Do you remember the almost immediate cry for retribution that took over? Everything we were hearing was, we have to basically wipe off the face of the earth the people who did this to us. And I get that. I get that reaction. My sermon that Sunday was, I will still say today, it's one of the most important sermons I ever preached and the one that received the most backlash. Because in the midst of calls to bomb Afghanistan and wipe out everybody, I stated that as followers of Jesus Christ, our first instinct should not be to give into fear and anger, to not let that guide our response, but to let Jesus Christ guide our response. To pray for the redemption of our world, which, by the way, includes the redemption of those behind the attack. Because if we go down that road of an eye for an eye, no matter how badly we are hurt, and no matter how good it feels in the moment, nothing about this world will ever change. The fact is, we should pray even harder for our enemies, because until all hearts are changed, we will never have peace in this world. I think you could see why it was not well received by everybody. 6 weeks in, I had someone advocating that I be fired. But I'm still sticking by that sermon. And I still try to practice that. Because going down that road of anger and hurt and vengeance only takes us further and further away from God. Remember, our hope and the hope of the world is Jesus Christ. We are called to be a light of hope. We are called to show people that there is another way. It's not always easy, but it's the only way that's going to get us what we most want, which is peace. So we need each other to stand against the hatred and the violence that has become so common in our world and in our rhetoric. We need each other because it's hard. The pull to take sides and to go down those roads from which there is no return is very tempting, and it's very strong. And the temptation, even if we don't want to go down that, the temptation to stay silent is strong as well. But if we stay silent, nobody knows that there's another way. It is easier to stand up if you have a supportive community around you. It's easier to say what you know in your heart needs to be said if someone is standing there with you. And it's easier to live out ways of love and compassion and justice and mercy, even in difficult situations, if we're already practicing it in a safe place where if we get it wrong, we know we will be forgiven. The church. This is the place to practice that better way and to encourage each other. And when we do that, we end up strengthening the very community we need for support. Because in embodying Christ's way in our relationships within the church, we remind each other we are a chosen race. We are a royal priesthood. We are a holy nation. We are God's own people. So when you get discouraged, come to church. When you get disillusioned, surround yourself with followers of Christ who will remind you not only of who you are, but that you are not alone. When you see others struggle with the challenge, the difficulty of living Christ's way, encourage them. Help them. Remember, you are God's own people and you are not alone. God is with you. God will strengthen you. God will encourage you, as will your companions on this journey. So let's help each other live in the light and shine that light so that others can see there is a better way. Amen.